Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1873, just past dusk. With the wind kicking up dust along the dry edges of the Platte River, Kenzie Jarrow gripped her son's hand and did not look back. She had fled in silence. No note, no warning. Just two children, a worn carpetbag, and a heart that had burned too long in the wrong fire. Her dress was torn at the hem, her boots pinched, and her arm throbbed where her husband had grabbed it 2 nights ago in a whiskey rage. But she had waited for the right moment when he was too drunk to stir and left while the moon was rising. "Keep walking, Toby," she whispered to her boy, who was barely 7 and already too old in the eyes. Her daughter, Tessa, only 4, shifted against her hip, half asleep and heavy with trust. They had been walking for hours. She had no destination, only the knowledge there was no going back. The lantern light of a small homestead blinked from the edge of a cottonwood grove. A barn, then a low-slung cabin came into view. Her breath hitched. It could be danger. It could be salvation. She chose to believe in the second. She reached the gate and stopped. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock. Before she could, the door opened. A tall man with a rifle in his hand stepped out. His dark hair curled behind his ears, and the light from the doorway caught the sharp lines of his face. Not old, not young. Maybe 30. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, and the look in his eyes said he had seen enough of life to ask questions before pointing that gun. Kenzie didn't flinch. She stood her ground. "I ain't armed," she said, her voice hoarse. He looked at her, then down at the children. "You lost." "No, I left." Her chin lifted. "My husband is back in Laramie. He drinks, he hits. I took my children and walked away." The man lowered the gun. "You got a name, Kenzie Jarrow. This is Toby and Tessa." He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated. "You do not know me." "I know enough." Inside, the cabin was warm, smelled of coffee and firewood. A kettle whistled low on the stove. The man set down the rifle, then crouched in front of Toby. "You hungry?" Toby nodded. The man stood and moved to the stove. "Name's Xavier Archer. I got beans and bread, nothing fancy." Kenzie let out a breath she had been holding for 3 days. Tessa stirred awake. "Mama." "It's all right, baby," she whispered. "We are safe." They sat around a small table. Xavier served the food without a word. The children ate fast, eyes wide as if the meal might vanish. Kenzie barely tasted hers, watching Xavier instead. He moved with quiet purpose. No sudden gestures. No questions yet. Just the kind of stillness that comes from knowing what pain looks like and choosing not to make it worse. When the children were asleep on a makeshift pallet near the fire, Kenzie stood at the hearth. "You do not need to keep us here," she said. "I will not stay where I am not wanted." Xavier leaned against the doorframe. "You are not in the way. I do not expect you to care. I do not expect you to trust me, but I do not turn away women with bruises and babies in their arms." Her eyes filled. She turned from him, ashamed of the tears. "I had no one else," she said quietly. "No family left, no friends who could help. You do now." He said it like it was simple truth, not a promise, not a burden, just a fact. Kenzie looked up at him. "Why would you care?" He held her gaze. "Because once, when I was 19, I watched my mother die from a man like the one you left, and I swore if I ever had the chance to stop it for someone else, I would." She nodded once, then sank into the rocker by the fire. The warmth crept into her bones. She had not felt safe in years. Xavier watched her in silence, then went outside to tend the horses. That night, she dreamed of nothing. The next morning, Xavier saddled a second horse and tied a small cart behind it. "You got no coat," he said, handing her a worn wool one from the back room. "Weather turns fast up here." She took it slowly. "You mean to let us stay?" "I mean to help. You can stay in the cabin. I will take the barn." "But you came from hell. Let this be the place you rest." Kenzie swallowed hard. "You do not know me. I know you are brave. And you are not alone anymore." The days passed with a quiet rhythm. Xavier taught Toby how to shovel feed, how to gather eggs without cracking them. Tessa followed Kenzie around the kitchen, dragging a rag doll Xavier had carved from pine. They worked. They ate. They healed. Kenzie did not speak of her husband. Xavier did not ask, but he noticed the way she stood straighter each day. the way her eyes found his with a little less fear. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn red. He brought 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her. "I never thought I would see anything like this again," she said, nodding at the hills. "You will see better." She turned her head. "You talk like you believe in something." "I believe in second chances." She studied him. "What about you? What about me? Have you ever been married?" "No." "Not much for town women. They look at a cowboy like me and see dirt or danger." Kenzie smiled softly. "I do not see dirt." He looked at her, his face unreadable. "Then what do you see?" She hesitated. "A man who gave shelter without asking for anything." The wind picked up. She pulled the coat tighter. "Do you ever get tired of being alone?" she asked. "Sometimes, but I never met someone I wanted to stay for." Kenzie looked down at her hands. "You think you could stay?" he asked, voice low. She met his eyes. "If you meant it, I could." He nodded once. Not quickly, not desperately, just sure, and in that look something passed between them, not lust, not pity, but the deep, steady beginning of something true. Kenzie reached out and touched his hand. He did not pull away. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the stars blinked into the sky. And for the first time in a long time, Kenzie believed she might not just survive but belong. By late October, the wind had begun its shift, less dry, more biting, curling down from the mountains with the scent of snow in its belly. Morning frost clung to the fence rails and turned the pump handle stiff beneath Kenzie's grip. She'd started fetching water at first light while Xavier fed the livestock, their mornings unfolding in quiet parallel. Tessa still slept through the earliest hours, curled beside Toby under the thick quilt Xavier had pulled from a chest without comment. That morning, Kenzie found herself reaching for the pail before he could beat her to it. "You're up early," he said, stepping out of the barn with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. "Habit," she replied, setting the brimming bucket on the porch. "He used to go out drinking late." I'd sit up waiting, then rise before him to keep the house from falling in on itself. Xavier rested his boot on the bottom step, eyes on the horizon. "You don't have to keep using old habits here. I know." She brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek and followed him into the barn. Dust hung like gauze in the morning sun, filtering through the slats. The horses shifted as they entered, recognizing the sound of grain being poured. "You always been here?" she asked, watching him work. "Bought this land 5 years back. Before that, cattle drives. Before that, odd jobs and a few bad winters. You buy it alone." He gave a slow nod. "Saved up. Took me longer than I thought it would, but I wanted something that didn't move." Kenzie leaned against a beam, fingers trailing along a rusted horseshoe nailed there. "I used to dream of a place with a porch and a door that locked. It locks now." She looked over at him. "I know." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I was thinking we could add another room. The loft's not meant for more than feed and mice." "You don't have to do that. I've got the wood, been meaning to for a while." "I'd like to help," she said. "If you'll let me." He handed her a hammer. "Only if you don't mind crooked nails. I raised 2 children on less than $1 some weeks. I can handle a bent nail." Later that day, Toby sat on the porch carving slivers from a branch with the small knife Xavier had given him under her watchful eye. Tessa played in the dirt with pine cones and a broken wooden spoon, humming tunelessly. Kenzie stood beside a half-framed wall, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, sawdust in her hair. Xavier measured a plank, then glanced at her. "You ever build anything before?" "A chicken coop." It leaned sideways, but it held. He handed her the length of board. "Then you're overqualified," she laughed, the sound surprising both of them. By the time the sun dipped low, the frame stood upright, rough but steady. Kenzie wiped her brow with the back of her hand and stepped back to admire it. "You think it'll hold?" His voice came from behind her. "I've seen worse stand through a storm." They stood a moment, side by side, watching the shadows lengthen. The children had gone inside, drawn by the smell of bean stew and the promise of warmth. A hawk circled far above, its cry sharp against the stillness. "You're good with them," she said. "I didn't think I would be. They trust you." He looked down. That means something? It does. She hesitated, then added, Toby used to flinch at loud sounds. He doesn't anymore. I noticed. She turned toward him, arms crossed loosely. I keep waiting for the fear to come back, for the peace to crack. It won't. Not here. A gust of wind lifted the corner of her shawl. She didn't pull it tighter. She let it go. You've done more than most would, she said. I didn't do it for thanks. I didn't give it for that. They stood like that until the cold crept in and the porch lamp glowed behind the window pane. When she finally moved, it was with sure steps. She opened the door, then paused. You coming in? He didn't answer at once. Then he gave a single nod and followed. Inside, the fire had caught well. Tessa curled in a patchwork nest with her doll. Toby leaned against the wall, eyes heavy. Kenzie ladled soup into bowls. Xavier took one and sat across from her at the small table, the children between them. There was no talk of the past, no need to fill the space with anything more than the clink of spoons and the hush of wind against the shutters. When the children were asleep, Kenzie stood at the hearth, fingers trailing along the mantel. I don't know what happens next, she said without turning. Xavier stepped closer, but not too close. You don't have to know, you just have to stay. She looked over her shoulder, and if I do, he met her eyes. Then I'll be here. Kenzie nodded once, then reached for his hand, not out of fear, not out of gratitude, but with the quiet steadiness of someone choosing. He let her. The first snow came in the night, a quiet dusting that softened the dry ground and clung to the branches like lace. When Kenzie stepped outside the next morning, the air bit at her cheeks and the world looked newly made. She stood on the porch for a long moment, arms crossed over her shawl, watching the sun lift itself over the horizon. The light caught on the frost-covered plains, turning them silver. Behind her, Toby's boots shuffled softly on the floorboards. Can we go down to the creek later? She turned to him. Not today, it'll be iced over and we've got work to do inside. You can help me sew the curtain for the new room, he groaned, but without protest. She tousled his hair before sending him back inside. He'd grown steadier since the first week they arrived, still quiet, but no longer wary. Inside, the cabin smelled of flour and wood smoke. Xavier had risen before them all, already splitting kindling by the barn. Kenzie could see him through the window, his breath visible in the cold, coat collar turned up, sleeves damp with melted snow. His movements were slower than usual, and he paused often, flexing his left hand. When he finally came in, she was kneading bread at the counter. You hurt yourself, she asked without looking up. He wiped his boots and stepped inside. Caught a nail 2 days back. It's nothing, she glanced over. It's swollen. He removed his glove and showed her. The knuckles were red and stiff, the skin around the joint bruised. Let me make a poultice later. If you don't rest it, it'll seize. He shrugged out of his coat. You know how to do that? I helped a midwife in Kansas for 2 winters, learned a few things. Xavier sat at the table, stretching his fingers. You always had to work. There wasn't any choice. My father died when I was 13. After that, it was just me and Mama trying to keep a roof over our heads. She took in washing and I ran errands for the doctor's wife. He nodded. That kind of life teaches you to notice things. Kenzie shaped the dough and set it aside. It teaches you not to expect help. Xavier didn't argue. He reached for the coffee but stopped, wincing as he tried to grip the handle. She poured it for him and set it down. You should wrap it. I will. Kenzie sat across from him. You ever break anything bad? Once, out past Fort Laramie. Horse threw me into a ditch. Took 3 weeks before I could lift my arm. Was there someone to help? There was a ranch woman a few miles off. Brought me soup every other day and told me I was too stubborn to die from something so small. Kenzie smiled. Did you love her? No. But she reminded me that not everyone out here is hard. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee. The fire crackled low, and Kenzie could hear the soft patter of Tessa's feet upstairs as she played in the new room. Xavier looked toward the staircase. She talks more now. She used to whisper to her doll instead of speaking to people. She doesn't whisper anymore. Kenzie folded her hands. It scares me sometimes how fast they forget what hurt them. They don't forget, he said. They just start trusting what's different, she nodded slowly. Sometimes I lie awake wondering if I did the right thing. Leaving, you did. I keep waiting for him to find us. Xavier looked at her for a long moment. If he does, he won't get far. She met his gaze. I don't want more blood. You won't have to see it, but I won't let him take you back. The certainty in his voice steadied something in her chest. She looked down at the table, then back up. I don't know what I'm to you, she said. But I feel safer here than I ever have. He leaned forward, resting his uninjured hand on the table between them. I don't know what you are to me yet either. But I find myself listening for your voice in the morning, and I look forward to seeing your hands in the flour. Her eyes softened, and she reached across the space, fingers grazing his. I don't move fast, she said. I'm not asking you to. That evening, Xavier sat in the armchair with his hand wrapped in clean linen, a faint scent of crushed pine and willow bark clinging to the cloth. Kenzie rocked Tessa near the fire, humming something quiet and slow. Toby sat on the floor carving a new shape from a piece of bark. When the children were asleep, Kenzie stepped outside again. The snow had thickened and the stars blinked sharp through the clear night. Xavier followed her, coat unbuttoned, breath rising in clouds. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Once. When I first bought it, I thought it might be a mistake. And now, he looked at her, the porch light catching in his eyes. Now I think it was waiting on the right person to walk through the gate. Kenzie leaned against the railing, her shoulder brushing his. I never thought I'd be wanted for anything but what I could endure. You aren't here because I pity you. I know. He didn't move away, neither did she. The cold deepened, but neither of them noticed. Not while the wind passed gently through the cottonwoods and the cabin behind them stood warm and full. By mid-November, the roof beams above the new room had settled into place, creaking softly under the weight of gathered snow. Inside, the warmth held steady. Kenzie had taken to sewing after supper, her hands steady with a needle as Tessa leaned drowsily against her, and Xavier read aloud from a book of frontier tales Toby had found in the bottom of a trunk. The words were plain, the stories rough-edged, but the boy listened close and Xavier's voice rarely faltered. One evening, after the children climbed into the loft to sleep, Kenzie lingered by the hearth, folding a blanket along its seams. Xavier remained at the table, rolling his injured hand slowly, the swelling down but the skin still tight. You ever think about bringing in cattle? She asked, settling beside him with a cup of boiled sassafras bark. Herding takes more hands than I have, he said. And I've never had much pull toward branding or chasing strays through bad weather. She traced the rim of her cup. What about crops? I tried beans once. Soil here's stubborn, needs turning and time I didn't have back then. Kenzie considered that. I could help come spring. If you're thinking of trying again. His eyes met hers. You planning on still being here come spring? She didn't look away. I haven't thought of leaving. He nodded, quiet settling between them again, this time not from hesitation but ease. She shifted slightly. I've been thinking of offering to wash for the nearest neighbors, or mend, something to bring in a little trade. You don't know anything here, I know, she said, but I want to earn my place. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You already have. Kenzie's fingers curled around the cup. When I left, I wasn't sure I'd ever feel like myself again. I thought what he took from me couldn't come back. It can, Xavier said. I think it is. A gust rattled the shutters. Xavier stood to check the latch. When he returned, he didn't sit across from her. He leaned against the hearth, watching the fire. I had a brother once, he said. Illy, 2 years younger. He joined up late toward the end of the war, never came back. Kenzie looked up. I didn't know you had family. Not anymore. Just the land, the stock, and what I've built with my hands. I'm sorry, he shook his head. He was full of fire, always wanted to see what was past the next ridge. I stayed back to look after Ma. Pa died when we were boys. He didn't like stillness. I chased it. She set her cup down. You ever think about leaving this place behind, starting somewhere else? I used to. But something about the quiet here started to feel like peace instead of punishment. Kenzie rose and crossed the room, stopping a few feet from him. I want to believe I can have that too. Without running any more. You can. They stood close now. The fire cast long shadows behind them, the cabin hushed, but for the soft breathing of the children above, Xavier's voice dropped. I didn't know what to expect when you knocked on that door. Neither did I, she said. I thought I was just giving someone a place to rest, but it's been more than that, hasn't it? She nodded. More than I ever let myself hope for. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I don't want to rush you, Kenzie. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope you'd stay for more than winter. Her eyes were steady. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't already thinking of spring. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But his hand stayed at her cheek a moment longer, and she leaned gently into the warmth. Later that night, after the fire had burned low and the coals glowed faint, Kenzie lay in the bed she now shared with Tessa, listening to the wind move through the trees outside. She heard the soft creak of Xavier's boots as he climbed the ladder to check on Toby, then descended again. A moment later, the front door eased open and closed. She rose, careful not to wake her daughter, and pulled on her shawl. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Xavier stood at the edge of the yard, looking out toward the hills. She stepped beside him. Couldn't sleep. Too quiet, he said, half smiling. I've gotten used to the sound of voices in the house. You'll have them for a long while yet. He turned. I'd like that. The stars hung low and bright, and the world around them was still. Kenzie slipped her hand into his, and he held it without needing to ask why. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The choice had been made. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the way they'd begun to build something with each day, something neither of them had known they needed until the moment it arrived. The days shortened into deeper cold. But inside the cabin, life had settled into a rhythm that felt not just bearable, but whole. In the mornings, Kenzie taught Toby to read from a Bible she found tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers. He was quick with letters when he had someone patient to guide him. Tessa learned to thread buttons onto string and made necklaces for the horses, who endured them with long, suffering grace. The new room, though unfinished in places, was warm enough to sleep in. Xavier had moved his bedroll there, though he still rose early to tend the animals and check the traps he'd set near the tree line. Kenzie didn't ask why he kept the bedroll so close to the door. She already knew. One afternoon, she found him repairing the harness in the barn, the light from the open doors catching on the silver in his hair she hadn't noticed before. You're favoring that hand again, she said, stepping inside with a tin of cured leather oil. It's the cold. Gets into the bone. She crouched beside him. Let me take over. You sure? You've done enough. He shifted aside and she took the strap from him. Her fingers worked the oil into the leather, slow and steady. You ever think about marrying again? He asked after a long silence. Her hands paused briefly. I did once, after Toby was born, but the thought passed. I was already surviving one man. I ask because I've been thinking, not about surviving, about choosing. She looked at him, the scent of leather and pine thick in the air between them. I'd want it to be different this time, she said. No white dress, no preacher I don't trust, just something quiet, honest. I'd want the same. I'd need it to be mine, not something handed to me or taken from me. Xavier nodded. Then let's make it yours. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The words settled in her chest, warm and certain. Kenzie stood and offered him her hand. Come on, supper's near ready. He rose, brushing sawdust from his shirt, and followed her into the fading light. They married 2 weeks later under the cottonwoods, their branches bare and rattling like bones in the wind. The nearest neighbors, the Tollivers, came with their 3 girls and brought dried apples and bread. Mrs. Tolliver lent Kenzie a blue wool shawl, and the girls braided Tessa's hair with threadbare ribbons. Toby stood beside Xavier and held the carved ring they'd made from a piece of ashwood. The man who spoke the words was no preacher, just an old trapper who'd once read law back east and kept the same Bible as Xavier. His voice was steady, his hands gnarled with age. After, they ate together on benches pulled from the barn, and the girls sang a song about stars and geese honking over the river. That night, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Kenzie and Xavier sat on the porch wrapped in a single quilt. The moon rose slow over the ridge and the air was sharp enough to turn their breath white. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. He kissed the side of her head. "You made this with your own hands." She leaned into him. "You gave me a place to start. You gave me a reason to stay." Inside, the fire crackled low and the cabin held its warmth. They went to bed as husband and wife, not out of ceremony or duty, but with the quiet knowing of two people who had finally chosen each other. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it bloomed fast. The snow melted into the thirsty earth, and green shoots pushed up along the fence line. Kenzie planted beans in the patch behind the barn, her skirts muddy and her smile soft. Tessa followed her with a bucket of water, sloshing more on herself than the soil. Toby took to helping Xavier with the fence repair, hammering with growing confidence. On the first warm evening, Xavier brought home 2 hens from the Tollivers, and Kenzie built a nesting box beside the shed. The eggs came a week later, and the children treated each one like treasure. They didn't speak much of the past anymore. There was no need. It had happened, and they had outrun it not by fleeing but by building something steadier, something earned. One night in June, Kenzie stood barefoot at the edge of the creek, the hem of her dress damp, fireflies blinking around her. Xavier came up beside her, his hand resting lightly at her back. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "We keep going," he said. "We raise them. We make it through winters, we keep the fire lit." She turned to him, her eyes full. "I love you, I know it," he said. "And I love you too." She kissed him beneath the trees, her hands in his shirt, the hush of water behind them. And when they walked back to the cabin, it was not as strangers or survivors, but as a family. The porch light glowed. The door stood open. And inside, the life they had made waited for them, steady and whole.